It seemed like forever. I could remember saying, oh gosh, I'm in hell. I mean, this is just the smoke and the flame. It was hot.
I heard someone yell out, everybody out, I think it's gonna blow.
They said we were going over 300 miles per hour. When the plane crashed, it was surreal. There was fire and debris. I saw people torn apart. It's like a war.
July 2nd, 1994, USAir Flight 1016 from Columbia to Charlotte forever changed the lives of many. The plane crashed in a field near the runway at Charlotte Douglas Airport, killing more than half of the passengers. Today we're hearing stories of survivors that hail from the Midlands. 25 years later, they're looking back on that fateful day.
Hello, I'm Jason Sturkey and I'm a survivor of USAir Flight 1016.
In 1994, the Saturday before the July 4th holiday was a sunny day in Columbia. Lots of hustle and bustle at the airports. Families taking trips for the long weekend.
At the last minute, I decided to go, and then somehow my nephew Christopher got on board as well.
Jason Sturkey, a soon-to-be junior at the University of South Carolina, had a seat booked on USAir Flight 1016, a 33-minute flight from Columbia to Charlotte. With him was his mother, Sue, and his nephew Christopher, ready for a 4th of July family gathering in Memphis.
Every year or two, one group would make the trip either direction. Either someone would come from Tennessee or someone would go from South Carolina to go visit some of my mom's family in Tennessee.
It was an evening flight, taking off from Columbia shortly after 6 o'clock. As passengers boarded the plane, some who were seated in the rear asked to move to the middle, including Sturkey's family.
I remember we were right around the wing area. My mom was on the aisle seat, I was in the middle, and then my nephew Christopher was to the right in the window seat.
So far, the flight was normal. At cruising altitude, Sturkey remembers clear blue skies. But soon, the sky was replaced with darkness.
It was almost pitch black dark. We had flown into the middle of a very dark gray, almost black thundercloud. The first thing I noticed that gave me an indication something might be wrong was I could tell that the plane dipped. You know, I equate it to being on a roller coaster.
The pilots were flying into a thunderstorm.
Wind chill alert, northeast boundary wind 190 at 13. Sir 1016 is on the go. This is 1016, understand you're on the go, sir. Fly runway heading, climb and maintain 3,000. Up to 3, we're taking a right turn now. Yes, sir, 1016, understand you're turning right. Yes, sir, 1016, when you have time, tell me you're heading. Yes, sir, 1016, Charlotte Tower.
At 6:43, the plane made impact.
I remember starting to think, you know, what's going on, but before I could process anything, there was one heavy jolt that threw me forward and backwards. And then within another split second, there was a much larger extreme, you know, most violent jolt that you can imagine that threw me forward again. You know, I now know that's when the plane had struck the ground. It was not a nosedive, it was a belly flop. I didn't hear anyone scream, oh no, we're going to crash. I could hear the engines revving up. Right after the drop and right before the first jolt, the engine started winding up.
The National Transportation Safety Board said a strong downward wind called a microburst slammed the DC-9 jet into the ground just west of the runway at Charlotte Douglas. The plane bounced, skidded into trees, then split into 3 parts.
And that second jolt, it kind of just launched me, kind of like being shot out of a cannon, because I couldn't see, hear. Well, I mean, I could see and hear. If I could open my eyes, I could hear a lot. The sound was horrific. It was just a lot of crunching, crashing sounds. As you can imagine, when all of the chaos came to a stop, I was lying flat on my back, so I'm surmising that that second jolt threw me from my seat. Even though I was buckled in, my pelvis was fractured on the left side right where the buckle was, and I had a square indention in my pelvis. I initially thought we had exploded in midair and I was just flying through the air, unable to open my eyes. But then after about 10 seconds, I'd say between 5 and 10 seconds of that feeling, everything came to a stop and I opened my eyes and I realized we were on the ground.
Part of the jet landed on a house. The homeowners were on a rare trip out of town. Sturkey laid trapped in debris.
Where I was located was inside the rear of the fuselage, near the tail section that had crashed into the house. And what I saw was the overhead of the airplane and where it met the structure of the house. My right arm was outstretched behind me and to the right, and I was lying flat on my back, and I couldn't even see my hand. My arm just disappeared in a pile of debris, and I couldn't pull it down because there was debris underneath my right elbow. And my left arm was sandwiched right here to my chest. I couldn't hardly breathe. I mean, I now know I had collapsed lungs, and that was why I couldn't breathe. I remember the smell of jet fuel. I was soaked in jet fuel. I remember the sound of the engines in the back. At least one of them, very close to me, was still going. I could feel intense heat coming from that direction, and I could hear fire crackling.
Moments later, a policeman arrived.
I wasn't sure if he had located me or not, but all I heard was the words, "Is there anybody in there?" And since I couldn't speak, with collapsed lungs, you can't talk. But I could groan and moan. As soon as I did that, he said the words, "I think I hear you in there, I'm going to get help." He was there before any fire departments were there. He actually drove up on the scene first. He was just driving down the road and happened upon it. And he's the one who told me when he first called it in, they didn't believe him. He had to get pretty emphatic with them that it was what he was saying it was. They thought it was a joke at first.
As the skies cleared, emergency crews surrounded the scene, pulling any survivors from the fiery wreckage. Other passengers in the section of the jet that landed on the house were able to run from the site. Sue and 5-year-old Christopher did not survive.
Within those first couple of minutes, when I was processing what had just happened, I knew in my spirit that if what happened to me had just happened to them, they did not survive.
Sturkey recalls being the last pulled to safety, thanks to the persistence of 2 Charlotte firefighters.
The first firefighter, I could hear them and they could talk to me, but I couldn't see them because there was a wall of debris between them and I. On 2 different occasions, I heard someone who seemed to be in authority yell out, "Everybody out, I think it's gonna blow." And the first time it happened, all I heard was the pitter-patter of feet running away, and everything just became deathly silent. When they returned after that first time, I don't know who he was, but one of the firefighters said to me, because I couldn't see his face, I could just hear him through the debris. He told me, he called me by name, he said, "Jason," he said, "I'm not gonna leave you ever again until you're out of here." He said, "I'm not leaving until you're out." Being soaked in jet fuel, I thought it was gonna explode at any minute. But luckily, by the grace of God, it did not.
After firefighters worked to free Sturkey from the debris, he was airlifted to the hospital. As soon as he hit the operating table, he says he went into cardiac arrest.
I credit being here today to those firefighters who worked tirelessly to get me there when they did, because even 30 seconds later, if that had happened and I had not been on the operating table, they wouldn't have had the tools to revive me. And I give God all the glory for that, because that was divine timing.
He would be on life support for 3 days.
My brother and my dad were in the trauma unit to see me sometime around 1:30 a.m. And I remember opening my eyes and seeing them, and just the look on their faces, I knew that my mom and Christopher did not survive. My family apparently stayed in their seats. And if I had not became separated from my seat, I would have most likely suffered the same fate. As we were cruising at altitude, before we knew anything was wrong, we were just up above the clouds. Christopher, at 5 years old, we were up above the clouds looking down at a layer of clouds. And he looked over at me and said, "Uncle Jason," he said, "Isn't this where Jesus lives?" Meaning up above, because you always say he lives in the clouds in heaven. And I said, "Yes, Christopher, this is where Jesus lives." And the next words out of his mouth were, "Why can't I see Jesus?"
Sturkey made a full recovery.
25 years.
In the years following the crash, he visited the firefighters who helped save his life, but says none of them took credit for never leaving his side.
5 years. And
he also met with survivors for a few years.
Something on this magnitude, it's always on your mind. You never forget it. It doesn't mean you live trapped by it. It doesn't enslave you, but it is always there. It's the default setting in my brain. Whenever my mind goes idle, whenever I'm switching gears from one thing to the next, that is where it goes. It goes to the actual crash. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. I'm not consumed by it. I don't let it dictate my life.
These past 25 years have become a new normal for Sturkey and his family. He is one of 20 to survive. 37 died in the crash.
There's so many awesome people that would be impacting the Midlands in a great way if they had not been lost that day. If anything, going forward, I would like that to be what people remember is the people who lost loved ones.
You heard people screaming.
There was fire.
I actually thought that the plane had exploded in midair.
Oh my God. Ooh.
I could see flames coming out of the plane itself.
I saw people torn apart.
People started running out, burned, scars, flesh hanging.
It was not a nosedive, it was a belly flop.
You feel for the people, the passengers.
Get a little choked up when I really start thinking about it.
Whole families were killed in that.
Miss Brown, I went to her daughter's funeral. You hear about a couple who got married that day. Miss Bates, it was her first flight, and she was scared to fly.
I don't understand why I survived and so many died.
She kept telling me we're okay, and I'm like, what happened? She said the plane crashed. She said it crashed.
My brother and my dad were in the trauma unit to see me sometime around 1:30 a.m. And I remember opening my eyes and seeing them, and just the look on their faces. I knew that my mom and Christopher did not survive.
I was in a coma for 8 days, and when I woke up, the first thing I heard was this kind of is the hard part. We buried your wife. We buried your wife yesterday.
I'm sorry. Can we? It's been 25 years.
It seems far away in time, but it seems like yesterday.
I'm 26 years old right now, and on July 2nd, 1994, I was on a plane crash with my mother.
The NTSB at the time, they didn't know why she survived. I was sitting by the window and she was in the middle, just like you do upon any descent. The pilot comes on and tells everyone to buckle their seatbelt. And she was laying down right when the pilot made that announcement. But after that, she wasn't there anymore. And it was like a dream state, and she was under the seat. And I didn't know why she was under the seat of the plane. In front of me, I'm like, she was buckled in, and I went to grab her. I remember the grab. I remember grabbing her. And I remember pulling her leg. And I didn't understand why I was doing that. I don't remember the impact. I just remember everything was dark and I couldn't see. I kept hearing her cry, and I kept hearing her cry. And I couldn't see her. I couldn't see her. And I heard this lady, she kept telling me, she said, she's right here, she's right here, she's right here. And she put her in my lap. She put her in my lap. I just held on to her hand and to my baby. I said, please don't take her. Please don't take her.
I don't remember anything.
The worst injury she acquired physically was a broken leg. There were a lot of other children that perished on that plane.
The National Transportation Safety Board said a strong downward wind called a microburst caused the crash of USAir Flight 1016. USAir said the flight crew did not get crucial weather information before flying into a thunderstorm, but now crews are equipped with a Doppler radar. So that's why we're bringing in Chief Meteorologist Efren Infante. Efren, you not only helped build these Doppler radars, tell us more about that and exactly what is a microburst.
Well, simply a microburst is taking a ball, throwing it up in the air, and then swatting it from the top and accelerating down. Let me show you what I mean, because a microburst is really starting from a thunderstorm. Once a thunderstorm starts, it has an upflow draft and a downflow draft, but in the middle, you can look at winds that can be coming down from this. Some can be localized, but more importantly, that air is hitting right to the ground and being forced out, and it could move at about 150 miles an hour from the cloud down to the deck. Unfortunately, this becomes a major problem for the planes as they fly into these areas. Let me show you more importantly of what we had today. We had a thunderstorm that moved through on max storm Doppler high definition. As you can see, it flowed out. Well, radar now, we can tell how fast the winds are moving in that particular area. And in storm relative velocity, during a storm, we can see how intense the winds are at any particular direction or height. It's also important to note that our technology will even show the height of a thunderstorm as it moves through. And the height where thunderstorms can get severe is about 50,000 feet. And the key thing about that is that our thunderstorms, especially in the Carolinas, well, this is a 1-hour loop in which they come up and come down very quickly. And with that outflow, these storms can develop very quickly. And here's the one key thing, Alicia, that we have the technology now, but more importantly, commercial airlines now have this in all of the planes, and they even have warnings for microbursts before the planes even get close.
Efren, thank you so much. That's good to hear. All right, we will be back with more News 19 at 7 after this. After an almost 7-week trial, a federal jury found USAir negligent in the crash of Flight 1016. Coming up tonight, we hear from another survivor. That's our time for a special edition of News 19 at 7. Thanks for joining us.